Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we answer the question, why use a trust? Before I give you the 5 reasons why you would want to use a trust, let me start with just some ground rules. Let's go ahead and get some definitions out the way. Inside of a trust, there's usually 3 players that are involved. The first one is the grantor. That's the person who actually funds the trust. They're the ones that have the assets like right now. The second individual is going to be your trustee. That person is going to be your fiduciary. They make sure that whatever the grantor wants the trust to do is what gets done. So whether that's giving the money to the beneficiary, paying the bills, making the payments, transferring it, whatever it is that you designed your trust to do, you have a fiduciary or a trustee who makes sure that that is taken care of. The third person is going to be your beneficiary. That is the person who has the benefit of the trust. Now, there are lots of ways to design a trust, and I'll make another video where I talk about some different kinds of trusts, but there really are a large variety of ways to use them. But I'll talk about the 5 most common aspects that you find often within each of them. The first one has to do with managing money. Unfortunately, everyone is not good with money. Now, whoever you had to become, and I often talk about the importance of wisdom. Wisdom is this understanding that I know that whatever I've created in my life, whether that is professionally, with my family, financially, spiritually, that it required a growth of me, that there was something that I had to do, someone I had to become, experiences that I had that created the wisdom that now allows me this success. Most people, when we transfer our assets, we forget that portion, so we don't transfer any of the experience and any of the knowledge and the wisdom, and as a result, they usually don't make the best financial decisions. If you're worried about that, then the number one reason you'd want to have a trust is the management of the money. You as the grantor get to decide exactly how the money is spent, on what frequency it's spent, and what is acceptable as far as a reason to spend the money. If you want your children to be using the money for college or to start a business or maybe even pay for a wedding or buy their first home, whatever it is that you're thinking, you can design your trust to distribute the money for the right reasons. Now, your trustee, your fiduciary, your financial professional, right? I could be your trustee. You could find your CPA as a trustee or your lawyer as a trustee. But whoever you have as a fiduciary, I do recommend they are a fiduciary where they're held to a different standard by law. And then naturally, you want to make sure that they're also just ethical people, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do. But if the first place you look is to make sure your trustee is a fiduciary, I think that's a great start. You at least giving yourself the opportunity to have some sort of recourse if the person doesn't spend the money in the right way. I've heard horror stories where the trustee is always using some lingo, mumbo jumbo, and this one was in the HOA community. So the money that's being held is supposed to be spent on certain things, but the person is not a fiduciary, and so they're just paying themselves each month out of the trust, and then they make it very difficult for anyone in the community to access the funds. So I would often tell you to be very cautious about who you make the trustee. But if you're not confident in your children or your heirs or the charity, whatever it is that you design the trust for, if you're not confident in them using the money in the way you intended, then a trust to manage the money is a great place to start. The second reason why you would want to use a trust is for credit protection, where if someone has a profession where maybe you're a doctor or a nurse or someone that could be sued for malpractice, where you don't want your entire estate to be a part of that, you could have umbrella insurance to make sure that you protect your assets, or you could have a trust to make sure you protect your assets. The only thing you have to do is you have to have what's called a Spendthrift Clause, which is just a very fancy way of saying that the beneficiaries don't have the ability to alter or give the money out or make really any financial decisions that are concerned with the trust. And as a result, they are unable to be sued, right? If you sue them, they're not able to say, okay, well, let me write you a check for $1 million out of the trust, because they don't have that ability. So as a result, most courts will say, well, the trust isn't a part of this negotiation. The person doesn't actually own the assets in the trust. They simply receive a benefit from the trust. Now, in that same example, if you were a doctor who was going to be sued for malpractice and you just put your money inside of a trust, but you were also the beneficiary and the grantor, then it's not going to work the same way because you still have the control over the trust. So the Spendthrift Clause, or the idea that you don't have any control over the assets, well, that's not really true. You're the grantor, so you have the ability to take money out of the trust and give it to the creditors. So if your plan is to use the trust to protect you from creditors, then you're not going to be able to be the grantor who has the control over the trust and the beneficiary who doesn't have control over the trust. The third reason why you'd want to consider using a trust is if you wanted to split the the interest in a property. So let's say you had 3 children and you had, I don't know, you had like a condo or an apartment or a farm. You had something that was able to generate some income, but maybe 2 of your children weren't interested in keeping the land. They just wanted to sell it so they can make the money off of it. But you had one child who wanted to kind of continue the farm or continue the apartment complex, whatever the asset is, where they said, I'm very interested in keeping the family business going. I don't want to sell the land. As a result, what you do is you split the asset between the income and the remainder, which is the actual property itself. And so what you'll do is you'll say, okay, my one child who wants to run the farm or wants to run the hotel, I will give them the property. They will then pay some sort of an interest payment to the other 2 who don't want the property at all, who just want to sell it. This can be done within a trust. So inside of the trust, you would design it that way where the kid gets the land, so they get the remainder, and then you would cash out the other 2 children over whatever the period of time, however you stipulated the income. If you said, I want to split it evenly 3 ways, and then the property appraised for $300,000, then the other 2 children who wanted to sell the property, once they received $100,000 of income payments from the revenue that the apartment or the farm generates, they're then done and the remainder goes to the first child. So the first child then gets to keep that farmland or that apartment because they wanted to keep running the business, but the other 2 children are totally fine because they wanted to sell it, and it would have sold for $300,000. They would have gotten $100,000 each. So now they have their money, and then the child who wanted to keep the land, they get to keep it. And so you are able to do this in a trust in a much simpler way than asking your children to kind of make that decision on their own, where they're trying to draw the legal documents, they're trying to figure out how it goes. You could also change your kid out with maybe a nonprofit or a church or something where you said, I really always gave a certain amount of money to the church each year. I would like you guys to keep doing that. And you can say keep doing that for however long you want to design it, whatever the dollar amount is, but you can make sure that you take care of each of your beneficiaries in a way where someone can keep the property and the asset and someone else can get the income payment, which is really nice. The 4th reason why you'd want to use a trust is to avoid probate. When you already take care of your assets being divvied out between your kids or your church or whatever nonprofits you support, there's no longer reason to go to probate court, which can be very expensive. In fact, in some states, it can be 5-6% of the actual cost of your estate is divvying everything out. The issue with probate, or at least the difficulty with it, is because it's still your property, it's in your estate. And as a result, when it goes to probate court, any debt that you owe, anyone that you still owe something to, that is who gets paid first. So when it goes to the probate court, they settle all of your debts, and then whatever is left, that is what goes to your beneficiaries, and whoever the court decides is that person, which may be who you like, and it may not be someone that you like. And so it's in your best interest that while you're alive, maybe you put yourself in a living revocable trust where you set it up, you're the beneficiary, you're the grantor, you set the rules, but when you pass, it turns into an irrevocable trust where your kids don't have control over it, or at least whoever the beneficiary is doesn't have control over it, to where your creditors can't go for it, as we mentioned, that Spendthrift Clause that you have in place, because it is an irrevocable trust. So that means that your kids or your beneficiary, they don't have the ability to adjust it. They can't have lost a lawsuit and just take the money out. It's however you designed it. And so as a result, the trust owns the property. It's not the kind where it's revocable where your kid has control over it. If your kid has control over it, then that means that they have the ability to pay a debt. So if you don't want them to be at risk by a creditor, then you have to make sure that they don't actually have control over it, but the trust owns it itself. And then your trustee, who we mentioned should be a fiduciary, they're the ones that give out the money. And the 5th reason why you'd want to use a trust is the taxes. So there are generally 4 tax savings that you can get. So number 1 is the transfer of future appreciation to the grantor's heirs. Number 2 is the minimization of transfer taxes on subsequent generations. Number 3 is the reduction in the size of the grantor's gross estate. And number 4 is the reduction of income taxes for the donor of income produced on the transferred asset. So I know that sounded like just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, so we'll go through each one. With the first one being the transfer of future appreciation to the grantor's heirs. Think of it like you have a property and the property's worth $100,000. And if you kept it for your whole life, maybe that property's worth $1 million by the time you pass. And now when you transfer it over, it becomes a taxable event over the $1 million on your estate. But if you were able to transfer it early, well, now the taxable event, as far as the appreciation, is not on you. It's already been transferred over to them. So it's a benefit for you and for them because they got it at the $100,000. So they're now growing it. And as a result, they're not going to pay that appreciation tax that they would have paid if it was transferred and it was worth $1 million versus the $100,000. The second one where it talks about minimizing taxes on future generations, what we're saying is because it's in an irrevocable trust, which again just means that your beneficiary doesn't have the ability to control or to maneuver the assets. And so as a result, it's not a part of their estate. So even though you transferred it at the $100,000 and you were able to save on the taxes, because it's now in the trust ownership and the trust owns it and now it's worth $1 million, well, your beneficiaries, they don't get taxed the $1 million. They just get the benefit. Whether that is a monthly check or whatever that is, they'll be taxed on the benefit that they receive, but they won't be taxed on the actual growth of the estate because it's not theirs. It belongs to the trust. The third one is just the reduction in size in the grantor's estate. If you were to put in a trust your assets, well, now that is not part of your gross estate. Why is that? Because you've already given it to the trust. Because you gave it to the trust, it reduces your overall estate taxes. Now, for most of you, that benefit won't really apply. Generally speaking, it's about $12 million is where you have to get to where you even have to worry about the estate tax or the death tax, as some people refer to it. And really anything under there is generally not given the death tax and the estate tax. But there is different probate and transfer taxes where you would be able to benefit by putting it inside of the estate early. And the fourth one was the reduction of income taxes for the donor of income produced on the transferred asset, which is just a very fancy way of saying when you put the asset inside of the trust, it becomes an income taxable event where you are able, as the grantor, to pay the income taxes, and then it lowers your overall estate because, right, you have less money, you also have less assets, so it lowers your estate because you pay the taxes to put it in there. By contrast, let's say you wanted to pay income taxes for me. Now, I would say, thank you so much, I appreciate it. And you'd say, you know what, Dre, you earned that. You are the bomb diggity. And while I appreciate the gift, it is a gift. So it would become a gift taxable event. Instead of where you pay for the trust, it's not seen as a gift tax. So you're totally fine with that. And so you can see when it comes to deciding why to set up a trust, there are 5 beneficial reasons. Number 1 is the management, and you just don't trust them with the money. Number 2 is the creditor protection to make sure that you're not being sued for some reason where you end up having assets in play. Number 3 is to split interest in a property. Number 4 is to avoid probate. And the 5th and final reason is to minimize your taxes. If you like the video, I ask you to like and subscribe, and feel free to check out other wisdometric videos if you're looking for ways to eradicate financial stress, generate passive income, and build a prosperous retirement strategy.